Now that Disney and Marvel rule the world, it's fun to go back and look at the early days of the MCU and see how Marvel were just stumbling around and figuring things out, like when Edward Norton was Hulk or Terrence Howard missed out on all that money, or when they hadn't realized Chris Hemsworth is actually really funny, so instead they made him really boring. It's easy to forget that things weren't always so smooth, and the video games were just flat out rough. Sega slapped us with 4 crummy movie tie-ins that could have and should have been surefire hits before dropping what looks like a swan song in comparison with Captain America Super Soldier. They chose Vancouver-based Next Level Games to develop this, who weren't particularly well regarded at the time. They'd impressed the world with the Mario Strikers games and the Punch-Out remake, but their 2 releases prior to this, Cybertron Adventures and the Wii version of Ghost Recon, were critical disasters. They'd also worked with the Marvel license before with 2007 Spider-Man Friend or Foe, which fared a bit better but still didn't really impress. So it's safe to say that no one was really expecting anything from Super Soldier, and it released to very little buzz. But I've always wondered about this game over the years, and after my Wolverine Origins video, all the comments on that bringing it up finally gave me an excuse to go out of my way and actually play it. It seems like a surprising amount of people remember it quite fondly, and I actually like the movie more than most, so the question is Captain America Super Soldier actually any good? Set during a montage from the first Captain America movie where Captain America is assaulting a bunch of bases, Super Soldier sees Captain America assault a base. Surprise, surprise. However, the 5-minute long prologue is actually set on the front lines where Cap runs into some enemy soldiers in the trenches which have high-tech Hydra gear, which sends him to this castle where the tech is being manufactured. The combat system is unashamedly Arkham-y. You have a single button counter which is pretty generous about cancelling out of attacks, the enemy telegraphing is fairly obvious, the game throws in a bit of slow motion to make it feel punchier, and combos don't really exist beyond the very basic. That classic ridiculous Arkham thing where you just stand there waiting to counter everyone with your all-powerful single counter button returns, but thankfully it's not as effective as you might think, and it does very little damage, if any at all. And it definitely doesn't work when mini-boss type enemies get thrown into the mix, and they do that a lot, so you need to be a bit more aggressive. Unfortunately though, when you're arguably unfairly comparing this to Arkham, the combat doesn't flow nearly as well, which is a big detriment. Being a cheaper sort of unpolished game, you never fully feel like you can rely on hitboxes or counters to consistently work exactly how they should, so you will get unfairly hit from time to time. And because of this, isolating enemies and getting to the outside of the pack is more important than you might think. You can also block attacks rather than countering, which stuns enemies in basically the same way, and some attacks are telegraphed in red, which requires you to dodge them. I actually preferred blocking over countering just because it made a really satisfying twang noise, and I feel like the shield itself has almost as much character as Cap. Speaking of the Arkham games, the similarities this shares with Asylum extend beyond just the combat. I have to imagine that the idea of setting Super Soldier entirely in the one location was also influenced by Asylum, and as an idea I think it's a really interesting one. Arkham Asylum, along with games like Metal Gear Solid and Resident Evil, have proven that you can set an entire action game in a single location, and even turn that location into its own character of sorts. But this castle just ain't there. I never got a real sense of place, like everywhere is cut up by these lengthy loading screens, and the locations somehow look different enough to not flow into each other, but samey enough to look repetitive. I'm not sure how they pulled that off. Some backtracking could have really helped stick the place together physically, and it seems like the game wants you to backtrack because you can actually go back to any location and get collectibles, but that's just not enough of a reason to do that. Right near the end, the objectives introduce a sewer system to quickly travel around the castle, and it actually gives you some objectives that require backtracking, and suddenly the castle started to feel a lot more like a real physical place, but it's just too little and too late. Honestly, it just comes off as unfinished. I feel like they were trying to do something more here and they didn't. The main problem though is that I never got a sense of what the baddies were actually doing there. Throughout the story I was told that they were manufacturing Hydra tech and using Cap's blood to create super soldiers, but I never really saw this. Like, there were glimpses of factories and human-sized test tubes, and you even saw regular employees working at computers from time to time, but there was never like a big reveal or a big set-piece location that kind of showed off what the castle was actually doing. It never feels like the locations are designed to tell a story or reveal anything. Instead, it just has a very PS2 vibe, and they're mostly just places for you to beat up bad guys. Thankfully, beating up bad guys is a solid old time, especially as it introduces more enemy types and mechanics. Like when enemies with guns quickly get thrown into the mix, if you time the block button well, you can use your shield to deflect bullets straight back into people, which really is about as fun as it sounds. And of course you can throw the shield and have it bounce off a bunch of enemies and boomerang back to you, but this is all done in just one button press. You face a group of enemies, press a trigger, and off it goes. It looks cool, but it's overly simple, so it doesn't feel that good and it doesn't do that much. You can aim aim it manually at single targets, but this is mainly for puzzles because in the heat of the moment, it's too slow to aim. Maybe they could have done something like Red Dead's Deadeye, where you slow down time and hit a bunch of targets with it. In fact, there's a somewhat similar mechanic to Deadeye, but it's a bit clunky and the game isn't really balanced in favor of using this mechanic because the ability meter is better spent on other things. I played this game on hard because medium was too easy, and where health regenerates on other difficulties, on hard the only way to get health back is by hitting enemies with special abilities. You feel the ability bar just by doing things in the game like platforming and beating guys up, and along with the janky Deadeye shield throw, you have a very heavy attack which costs 1 bar, a heavier attack which can weaponize enemies that costs 2 bars, and an enraged mode which costs the full 4 bars. On hard you're always trying to top up your health, so it's really only the heavy attack and the weaponized abilities that you'll use, and I really liked the weaponized one for some mini bosses because it just turns them into a stationary turret and you can mow down enemies with it. It's fantastic. The enemy variety in general is on the thinner side with just a handful of regular troop variations and a handful of mech suit guy variations, but they mix together surprisingly well. Things don't fare quite as well outside of the combat though. Super Soldier tries its hand at platforming, which is almost like this weird minigame that involves timing jump button presses and hoping you're pressing them at the right time because there's no prompt. Most of the time you walk up to a very on the nose, very out of place looking platforming section, and then you press the jump button a bunch of times until it's over. Occasionally you might have to switch direction, but otherwise that's kind of it. It's super linear and it's mostly unfailable, so it's just really boring. You do it a lot in the game, but there's nothing more to really say about it. It's just a massive missed opportunity. There's also the occasional puzzle, but the puzzles never got more complex than just throwing your shield at things to break them. And of course you have detective vision because this is a knockoff Arkham game. The rest of the downtime involves a mix of a very easy busy work number matching minigame, a very easy busy work hot wiring minigame, and grabbing collectibles scattered around in every room, which feels like, you guessed it, busy work. Games like this that have collectibles lazily lying around everywhere is a real pet peeve of mine, and this is about as bad as it gets. Like, they're pretty much not even hidden, it's just annoying going over and pressing a button and waiting for a pickup animation to play out. And I know this sounds like extreme nitpicking, but the amount of time wasted picking up random dossiers or ceramic eggs and just stuffing them in Cap's pants actually kind of adds up when they're literally in every single room. It's almost more fun if you actively ignore them, but that just plays on your anxiety because they give you XP and some of them actually give you little bonus combat perks. XP is used in a really simple, almost linear upgrade tree that doesn't bring much to the table. It's a couple of new moves and the shield bouncing off more enemies in one throw, that sort of thing. It's another missed opportunity. If you're the kind of person who likes to 100% games, good luck with this one, because part of 100%ing it not only involves getting all those collectibles, but it involves breaking almost every physics object in the game, and this game loves its physics objects. The new moves should be pretty cool because they use the shield to bash enemies or do area of effect damage, but they take way too long to charge up, so they're just not viable at all. The shield really is a casualty of this otherwise fun enough combat system. There just isn't enough of a reason to ever use it, which is a shame because it's a Captain America game. Fans of the movie would be pleased though that Chris Evans returns alongside Hayley Atwell's voice over the radio, Sebastian Stan as Bucky, and 3 of the film's squad mates also reprise their roles, and they all do a good job with the script they're given. Being on the budgety side, the cutscenes can be a little awkward and under-animated, but they're passable enough, and it's nice to have so much talent from the movie.
Bucky, are you alright?
I used to get worse from that fat kid on Delancey. Big as a brick house and twice as stupid.
The others? Are they...
Alive last I saw him. Madam Hydra took Dugan and Fallsworth. That direction.
There's a point early on where you have a run-in with the first boss, Wolfgang Von Strucker, which unfortunately, while it does shine a light on the clunky side of the combat, it's otherwise pretty fun and well designed and does a good job of making this boss seem threatening, as he's just so obnoxiously evil and he has a robotic arm and they bring him back over and over. Also, side note on this guy, he's a character in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which is set in modern times, which in itself retcons this game, so this is considered to be non-canon, though initially it was meant to be canon. Once you beat him, you're captured and treated to a really solid first-person setup cutscene, where the main villain named Zola, who is this guy from the movie, shares his plans to make super soldiers with the help of Captain America's blood, and a femme fatale named Madam Hydra is set up as a villain and future boss battle. As with all the cutscenes, it's a little underbaked, but it's filled with sass and danger, and it kickstarts the story quite nicely, even if it happens to be a little late in terms of pacing. It's all looking great at this point from a storytelling perspective, but it just kind of slowly fizzles out, and there's nothing you can specifically point at as the reason for why this is, because on paper nothing is really wrong. As the the story continues, you fight Madam Hydra, and that's not bad, and the Tesseract gets involved, and you even have a cameo from Red Skull, voiced by none other than Owen Wilson impersonation extraordinaire Keith Ferguson. You meet up and help save multiple of the army boys from the movie, and there's even an impressive amount of unlockable content with voice diary entries and slideshows which genuinely flesh out the story quite a bit. Fans of the MCU lore would probably get a real kick out of this, even if it isn't canon anymore. But when I reflect on what I was actually doing in this game, when I look back, when I try and think about the moment-to-moment gameplay, I mostly just think about destroying turrets and smashing robots and getting frustrated at all the jank. The balance between nice story bits and just wandering around picking up collectibles and killing things is just way off in favor of the gameplay, to the point where I'd forget the purpose behind anything I was doing. Even in writing this video, I had to Google the story again just for the basic premise, which is never a good sign. It doesn't help that there's an aura of it all being unfinished and lacking nuance. For example, there's multiple instances in the game where I had to listen into a radio to receive a door code, and every time you do this, the enemies on the radio just coincidentally happen to be announcing the door codes, and then you don't even use the codes because it's just another of many really boring number matching minigames every single time. It's stuff like this that just makes it feel so sloppy. But at its core, this is a simple beat 'em up, and the combat carries you through a 6-hour-long campaign. Sure, it's a little clunky, and I wish there was more depth to it and more shield action, but it offers a solid challenge on hard mode. It's punchy with nice combat animations, and there are these fleeting moments where you can throw your shield into 4 guys and punch out a dude and catch your shield and deflect a bullet back at some guy before destroying an enemy mech. There's these little nuggets every now and again where it just flows wonderfully, and I love that. However, from start to finish, I kept having these intrusive thoughts about things it could have done better. Imagine if the castle was as cool and memorable as something like Arkham Asylum or Shadow Moses. Imagine if there was some personal sacrifice or more personal motivation, like maybe I had to save Peggy Carter from the clutches of evil. Imagine if there was some well-written banter throughout with your squad mates as they fought alongside you instead of just Cap being alone the whole time. Or maybe Cap finds himself in a moral quandary and has to struggle to do what is right. Or perhaps more realistically, just make the platforming actually good and the upgrading system more than superficial. Make the player backtrack and actually think about where they need to go so that they can feel smart. Instead of putting all that effort into those audio logs and slideshows, use that recording studio time to have Cap be able to have conversations with his squad or call Stark and Peggy and chat to them like Metal Gear Solid style. And in terms of combat, just make it more like Captain America. You know that leap thing that you can do in Wolverine Origins? That's something that Cap can actually physically do in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, so they really could have done something like that here. And as I said earlier, the shield just calls for more of a role. Maybe have real old school beat 'em up style combos too, because the combat is a little bit too far on the simple side. I think I was just a bit frustrated by the potential of it all. On balance, it is still pretty decent. It seems a bit unfinished and it's obviously quite budgety, so by giving it a bit of lenience there, it's an alright game. Those fleeting moments in combat can feel amazing, and it's short enough to be a really sort of chilled out playthrough. I know if I owned this back in 2011, I'd have enjoyed it and probably played through it a couple of times, so despite all my grumpiness, it's a very light recommendation for anyone who feels like playing through a simple beat 'em up. I reviewed this game on the 360, and this version also came out on PS3, but both platforms suffer from poor performance, which is a real shame. It was planned to come out on the PC, but that was cancelled, so here's hoping that emulation fixes this up someday. It's in-game and running kind of poorly in RPCS3, so there is some hope. Different versions came out on DS, 3DS, and Wii, and a PSP version was also cancelled, so maybe they're topics for another video. Marvel stopped working for Sega after this, for reasons you can probably figure out, and MCU games went pretty quiet aside from a few things like a Lego game, because of course there is, and the upcoming Square Enix Avengers game could be pretty interesting. The developer Next Level Games would go on to exclusively develop Nintendo games with Luigi's Mansion 2 and that 3DS Metroid Prime game that everyone was really disappointed with. They're still independent apparently, but in 2014 they announced that they were only going to work with Nintendo from then on, so Super Soldier is their final non-Nintendo product. And with that, we conclude the look back at Captain America's Super Soldier. This is the bit where I thank all my patrons, so thanks to all the people on the screen right now, and all the people that aren't on the screen right now that also contribute to my Patreon, and special thanks to Analog Man, By Minimme Branded Pregnancy Tests, Caden the Dingo, Dad, Devin Grandal, Dominic Chikoki, Dump Truck Parked in My Driveway, Evil Chicken, Homer821, Labcat, Lucas Raysevic, Magnus Ikomo Stavik, Mattias Bayes, Maximilian Kunzman, May Oris, Mizaki, Mrs. Minime, Peaceful Kumquat, Renegade, Review Disney Planes, Steel Kristenberry, Trixie Emerson, Writing on Games, and Zindictive. Thank you so much for supporting me on Patreon. Links to my Patreon are in the description. You get some like exclusive content and all that stuff. You can check it out. I also have like a Twitter and a Discord and all that YouTube stuff that people have. Yeah, hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.